So welcome. Welcome to Spring Into Research and researching federal statutes using public sources. I am Savannah Nolan, and let's talk about what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the legislative process itself and how statutes get published. Then we're going to talk about sources for federal statutes that are publicly available or available through UGA resources for everyone. And then we're going to talk about parts of a statutory compilation or a code and research tools and methods for finding statutes. A preliminary note. This is from the YouTube College Humor series, What If Google Were a Person? Google is our friend today. Look at him being so friendly. So don't be afraid to Google, but Google judiciously. So check your sources, make sure Google is leading you towards some of the sources we're going to talk about. So first we have the legislative process and the publication of a statute. This may be kind of a flashback to high school civics, maybe, but if not, this is the general federal legislative process. The state process is also very similar, but it may have slight differences. For example, sometimes they call things bill readings instead of a bill being introduced. So for the federal system, first we have a draft bill that is put together either by members of Congress or the administration or other people, including lobbyists may come forth with a draft bill they would like a particular congressperson to put forth. And then the congressperson introduces that bill in either the House or the Senate. Then it is known as HR or S, depending on which chamber we're in, and then the number that it was introduced in. So the very first bill of the year would be HR number 1 in the House. The 100th bill would be HR 100. From there, it gets sent to committee, the specific subcommittee of Congress that then marks it up, holds hearings about the bill, and makes some changes to the text as they think is appropriate. Then the bill comes out of committee and it's reported out with a report where the committee makes notes about what they changed and why. And then there's the floor activity, where there may be debates about the bill and there may be votes. Then we do it again on the other side. Sorry, that's our Google guy. Here we go. I didn't realize I was on the wrong page. So here's our draft process. We have the introduction, the committee, the vote to report, and then the floor activity. Then we do it again on the other side. So if it was introduced in the House, we do it on the Senate side. This is kind of an ideal version of the process. It may be a little bit messier. We may have dual bills introduced at the same time, both in the House and Senate. So this may be simultaneous, but that's okay. At the end, we have the conference where both bill versions and both the House and the Senate will come together and try to hammer out the differences between the two if necessary, if there have been changes. The president will then either sign or veto the bill, and we'll get into how that can be a little more complex in rare circumstances in a second. And then the bill becomes a law. So let's dig into those presidential options. Either he signs the bill into law, great, or he vetoes the bill. Congress can override the veto if there is a 2/3 majority to do so in both chambers. The last time this was done was for a budgetary bill under Donald Trump. The time before that, it was the JASTA, which was against state-sponsored terrorism under Barack Obama, kind of opposed to Saudi Arabia. It happens very rarely. If the president doesn't sign or veto the bill becomes law after 10 days. That hardly ever happens at the federal level. And finally, we have what we call a pocket veto, where the president doesn't sign or veto the bill and Congress adjourns, not just takes a vacation, but completely adjourns during that 10-day review period. Then the bill would not become a law. And the last time that happened was under President Clinton in the 90s. How do we keep track of all of this? We can use congress.gov, which is a website that is free. It's put together by the Library of Congress. It's updated at 4 a.m. every day. Two things that I want to point out before we take a look at congress.gov live. One is this tricky little search bar here. It's always going to want to show you the current Congress, regardless of what you're asking for. So if you want a historical statute going back to the 90s or so, you'll have to change that from the current Congress to a previous Congress. Also, you can expand this to have more search options and how to do a more advanced search than just typing things in the search bar. So let's take a look. This is congress.gov. Like I said, here is that search bar. You can change it to all Congresses. We're going to stick with current Congress for now. And these are kind of our advanced searches here. Our advanced search options, but I'm going to leave it there for now. And we're going to look for President Biden's big American Rescue Plan that I've heard so much about on the news. You'll notice I'm putting it in quotation marks. That means it's going to search for all of those phrases together as one term, rather than anywhere it sees American or rescue or plan. And right now it's giving me everything. I want to uncheck all of this and only look at the legislation. And you'll see I still have to do a little bit of scrolling. And I can use this toolbar here to kind of see what I'm looking for. I know that the American Rescue Plan became a law. So as I'm scrolling down, I can skim through. This became a law, but it's telling me the title. It wants to repeal transaction reporting threshold. But here down, eventually, we have HR 1319. That means it was the 1,319th bill introduced in this congressional session, and it became law. It's also telling me that it became Public Law 117-2. That numbering system is kind of the same, where it's the second law that was passed in the 117th Congress. Let's click into this and look a little bit more. We have a wealth of information on this page, including who introduced it, whether or not it became law. But the main navigatory tool here are these tabs. So first I have a summary of the bill that was written by CRS, or the Congressional Research Service. That's a division of the Library of Congress that is nonpartisan and just does research for Congress, whatever Congress needs. On the text tab, I can see the text of the legislation in either TXT form or PDF form. And when I click that down arrow, I can see all of the previous different versions of it as well. But the main money tool here is the Actions tab, where I can see all of the major actions of how this bill became a law. So just like our flow chart, it was introduced in the House, then it went to the House Committee on the Budget, and they reported it out. It was passed in the House, it was passed in the Senate. Then they had that conference where they resolved their differences. Then it was presented to the president and signed and became public law. This is the quick and easy version of this. If you want to see all of the actions, there are 121 different actions, and that can include things like debates. We have votes here that you can see, and you can actually click on anything that's hyperlinked and it will take you to the original document within congress.gov. So let's click on this record vote number. You can see specifically whether your specific senator that you're researching voted for or against this particular bill. Finally, CRS has these related bills. So if you're looking into this bill, you might want to come on this tab, this related bills tab, to see if there are other bills you might want to be researching. Because this is a budget bill, it's going to be tied to a lot of different things. So how useful these other related bills are really depends on the specificity of the original bill that you're looking at. Are there any questions so far? Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. So this is a flow chart about how statutes are published. As we've already talked about, while it's becoming a law, we have our bill that's numbered with the Congress. So this was the 117th Congress, then either the House or the Senate, and the number that it was introduced. So the American Rescue Act that we were just looking at was 117 HR 1319. Then it becomes a law. And that's when it's assigned that public law number. We call it a slip law at this stage because it used to be a little slip of paper like this, or a lightly bound large group of papers if it's 200 pages like this budget bill was, like this particular plan was. And we would slip it into binders until the end of the session, the congressional session, when those would be bound and we would purchase books called the Statutes at Large. Nowadays, everything's published almost immediately. It's available online at govinfo.gov. The session laws take a little bit longer to come out, but functionally now they are simultaneous because we know where the slip laws are going to be published in the session laws. Let's take a look at govinfo.gov. Govinfo.gov is one of the main hubs of our government publication system. And one of my favorite ways to navigate it is to click on category. And then it automatically comes to bills and statutes. And I'm going to click on public and private laws. So now I can look at all of the public and private laws if there were any for this session. All of the public laws that have passed in this Congress so far. And right there I can see Public Law 117-2, American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Let's look at the PDF. So this is the slip law, but the slip law and the session law are going to look exactly the same. The text is going to be the same. The little sidebars are going to be the same. Everything's going to look exactly the same. It's even going to tell me where it's going to be published in the statutes at large. And quite often you'll see where it's published, where it's going to be published in the US code on the side of it. We'll get to the code in a second. So that's the session laws, the statutes at large. And then every 6 years, those are codified, which we'll get to in a second, into the US code. They chop up and reorganize the bits by topic, and they keep only what's in force. So codification means that it is only what is currently in force arranged by topic. That is arranged into the US code, which has various titles and sections. And that is a current picture of the law as it is today. So we looked at public laws on govinfo.gov, but I just want to talk about what private laws are for a second. You won't hear about private laws too much because they deal with one individual person or a small group, and they're enacted to assist citizens that have been injured by government programs or who are appealing an executive agency ruling, such as deportation. So usually they affect only one individual person. In this case, this private law was to award the presidential, the Medal of Honor to John Canley for acts of valor. That was the last one the first one that was passed in the 115th Congress. Whereas this is a public law that affects everybody. And this is just like we just saw with our American Rescue Plan Act. Same pieces, where it has the unique public law number with the Congress and then the order that the law was passed. We have our statutes at large number of where it's going to be in the bound books. And again, that's volume number and then what the thing is, and then the page number that it starts on. And it's even going to tell me what the original bill number was. So this used to be HR 381 before it became a law. And finally, they're being especially helpful in telling us where it's going to go in the US code once it's codified. So this is going to be in Title 16 of the US code at page 1132. These are those bound books that I keep talking about, the statutes at large. Quite often there will be a couple of different volumes for each congressional session. Like here you can see we have we have 3 for 1997 that are in the shot here. So that's how we get thousands of pages all bound together. But why do I need to use the statutes at large? Well, because we don't always want to see a picture of the law as it currently is. Sometimes we need to see the historical research and how the statute has changed over time, or the context around what the statutes were being passed. Or we may need to see the uncodified act to see what the original text was before a subsequent amendment changed it. Sometimes we may want to see what all was jammed together before bits were scattered throughout all of the US code. One of my favorite examples of this is the US Patriot Act, which is a big important act that everyone remembers from being one of the aftermath of 9/11 pieces of legislation. Most of the pieces of that ended up in national security and banking laws, but there's one little piece that ended up in FERPA. And if you're a librarian, you're familiar with FERPA. That's the Student Privacy Act. And under normal circumstances, if you are in my class, I cannot tell anyone that you are in my class or whether or not you're showing up for class. There is an exception to that. If there is some sort of terrible emergency, then I can tell law enforcement whether or not you were in my class that day. And that is a specific section that came from the USA Patriot Act and ended up in the FERPA code section. We also might want to see temporary or private laws. Codified acts, again, are only what are public laws currently in force, so temporary acts don't make the cut. And finally, the statutes at large is the law as passed by Congress. It is the legal evidence of the law. So if there's ever a discrepancy between the code and the statutes at large wins. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen sometimes. So where can I find these session laws online? We've already looked at GovInfo, which is free and follows our general rule of the internet. So it has everything from about 1995 to the present. And we also have statutes at large PDFs from govinfo.gov from 1951 to the present. And these we can browse or we can search. There is also, if you want to see all of the statutes at large, the Law Library of Congress has digitized them from 1789 to the present. Let's take a look at that. Here is that page. Again, you could use Google to get here. But it's a little difficult to use because you're looking at it in kind of digital book form. So you have to kind of scroll a little bit. There's an advertisement. We get to a lot of stuff before we actually get to the laws. And then here we have a list of the acts. It's written in its original script. It literally is a scan of the book. So that's kind of helpful. Definitely helpful if it's the only option you have if you need history or research going back past 1951. But the UGA community has another option, which is Hein Online, which is paid for by the libraries. It's one of our lesser known but really awesome databases. You can access it from either the main libraries page or the law libraries page. I'm going to go at it through the law libraries website for today. You can scroll down here and come to research databases. And we have it on our popular databases under Hein Online. It's best to think of Hein Online as a database full of databases. So here we have a database that's full of a bunch of law journals. We have down here various versions of the US code. But right now we're looking at the statutes at large. And I can click on the statutes at large again. And you can see the last one that was published was in 2014. So the government publishing office is a little slow. We got to bear with them. But they have everything going back to 1789. And this should look exactly like what we just looked at from the Library of Congress. But you can see it's a little easier to navigate through this section over here. And I can also use this search within button to try to find a particular word if I find a particularly good search word. What was one that I did recently? I was looking for the Gin Act in a different section. So Gin Act is a good search term. It's nice and unique. Any questions about that so far? Okay, in that case, we're going to move on to the US Code. These are three different flavors of the US Code that we have in print. We have the United States Code, the official version published by the Government Publishing Office. And then we have the United States Code Annotated, which is published by a publisher called West, and the United States Code Service, which is published by Lexis. Again, here's that codification graphic. I want it to stick in your brain. We're chopping up the laws and rearranging them by what is currently in force, arranged by topic. Our poor little session law pumpkins are going to become code pie. And who is our Swedish chef in this? The House Office of Law Revision Council, a specific office of librarians and lawyers that work together to figure out where all of these statutory bits should go in the US Code. Like I said, big omnibus bills like the Patriot Act or like the American Rescue Plan get very messy. They go in lots of different places. Amendments from session laws are consolidated and incorporated, and repealed laws are eliminated, only what's currently in force. Again, the code is only laws of a general and permanent nature, so it doesn't have any repealed, private, or temporary acts. This is mostly what you're going to be using when you're doing searches for what is the current law or what was the current law in a specific time period. Some other terms that you'll see thrown about when we're talking about statutory compilations are what is official versus unofficial. A code is official when it's published or adopted by the government of the jurisdiction making the laws. So we said earlier, if it's published by the GPO, it's official. That is the official government publication. We can also have annotated or unannotated. What other notes did the editors put there for us? An unannotated code includes only the text and the official notes. An annotated code has other things that will help you find other resources, like specific cases that highlight what the statute means, or library references to secondary sources. You can mix and match and have any different flavor of these two spectrums. So for example, the US Code published by the GPO is unannotated and official, whereas the other two that we saw, the USCA and the USCS, are both annotated and unofficial. But the official code of the state of Georgia is annotated and official, even though it's published by Lexis. All right, enough yammering. Where can I find this online? In Hide Online, you can find it from the very dawn of time to the present, as with most things in Hide Online. Govinfo.gov follows our general rule of the internet and has from 1994 to the present. And we have two versions that show you the current version. They don't show you the historical versions. uscode.house.gov and LII, or the Legal Information Institute from Cornell. This is also known as the Brown website in my class. It is the version of the US Code from the Office of Law Revision Council. In my experience, it is generally the most up-to-date. It is usually more up-to-date than Westlaw or Lexis, actually. And this is Cornell's LII. Cornell's LII should be taken with a grain of salt. You can use Google to access it, which is great. You can use Google to search it, which is awesome, but it's not super clear how often they update. When you look, they tell you that they scrape the US Code site periodically, but what does periodically mean? So be careful. Now let's look at the parts of a code, just like we look at the parts of a statute. There are 52 titles in the US Code, numbered 1 to 54, but 2 of the titles are missing. They are mostly in alphabetical order until you get to the back end where things got too unwieldy, so we broke them out into their own sections. And let's look at uscode.house.gov to take a closer look at that. We have our general provisions in the front, and what does general provisions mean? Kind of how the law functions. And then we also have the president, the flag and seal, and government organizations, employees, domestic security. Basically the setup of our basics of government for the first 6 titles. Then we go alphabetically until we hit those, the space program, which obviously wasn't around in 1926, voting and elections, and national park and services and related programs. These kind of 3 that got bumped out. The titles are then broken down into chapters inside of them, which contain sections. So it's very hierarchical. Everything is, again, organized by subject. Let's take a look here, and let's click on food and drugs. And you can see we have a bunch of different topics, including tea, under chapter 2. Which has been repealed. Let's look under filled milk. We have definitions. Definitions is usually the first section. And then we have manufacturer, penalties, and regulations for enforcement. Usually when you're looking in a code section, no matter how you get there, still look at the table of contents to see what's around your topic. Because since it's arranged thematically, you may need other sections that are around it in order to fully understand what's going on, especially this definition section up at the top. So you never want to just get to one statute, read it, and think you're done. So what are the individual sections that I'm going to be looking at? First, we have the text of the law. Then we have source credits, all of those statute-y bits that got chopped up and rearranged into making the code section. And then we may have some statutory and editorial notes. Let's look into this. So here's the anatomy of my code section. Here's the text of the law itself. And there are those statute-y bits. So this was first enacted by Public Law 90-321. And then Public Law 95-101 added some more stuff to it in 1977. So this was in the 60s, this was in the 70s. What if there was another bill in 1975 that the 1977 bill completely got rid of all of the language from it? It would no longer show up in our statutory section here, in our source credits, because it would no longer be a statute-y bit that is currently in force. So for that, I would have to rely on the editor's notes, which you can't see here, to tell me exactly how many acts were taken in and out of this. The federal system is very good about this. The state system is a little bit more of a battle. And then here it's giving us a reference to another subsection that relies on this section. So that was an unannotated version. Now we're going to look at the same section, but in an annotated code section. So this one's going to have more editor's notes and more cross-references, and it'll tell us about relative cases or secondary sources. Same text, same source credits, but now under that, you can see these are those editor's notes that I was talking about. So here we have just the 1968 Act and the 1977 Act. So there wasn't a 1975 Act that got completely repealed. That's just me making it up, but there could have been. And if so, it would have been here. You see, I also have these library references that tell me that I can look in an encyclopedia and look in the trademark encyclopedia look in the Corpus Juris Secundum, one of our main encyclopedias, under trademarks, trade names, and unfair competition in section 237. And it's going to talk about some of the same laws that we're looking at in the statute. If I wanted to look at a specific law review, it's giving me, this looks like a particularly good law review about this topic, and it's giving me the citation for it. This is another type of annotation. In the West system, it's called notes of decisions. In Lexis, it's called case notes. And it is a bunch of different little case summaries about cases that have interpreted this law. So at the top, you'll usually have this kind of index. So you see harassment generally is going to be section 1, topic 1. And then it gives me a summary that the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act that we're looking at was ruled to prohibit debt collectors from engaging in any conduct designed to harass, oppress, or abuse the debtor. And that was held in this Bieber versus Associated Collection Services. And it gives me the citation to that case. And I have a couple of different harassments cases, and then it moves on to the civil actions case. This is a research goldmine when you're starting with a statute or a topic, because then you can find one good case. And if you can find one good case on point for your question, you can spin that out using other research tools to find other good cases. As I mentioned, in West, it's called notes of decisions. In Lexis, it's called case notes, and it will bring you to other relevant secondary sources. This is just part of a whole. We could do a whole nother class on case law research and secondary sources, but today we're just focusing on statutes. Any questions so far? Okay. What are some research tools for finding statutes? Well, we could start with a secondary source, and you should. I did not. When I first wrote my first note as a 2L here at UGA School of Law, I just threw things in the Google bar and I tried to see what stuck. And I worked and I spent about 40 hours working on this paper. And I showed it to one of our librarians, Maureen, and she looked at it and she goes, "Oh, this is good. You've essentially rewritten what Nimmer has to say on it from scratch." And I was like, "What? Pardon?" There was a secondary source, a big treatise called Nimmer on Copyright, and it tells you everything you could ever want to know about copyright. And I had done all of the work that I could have just read this page for. I could have saved myself 40 hours. So you should start with secondary sources. If you're not going to, if you know about what you're talking about, you can start with a statutory compilation like a code, either in print or online. You can browse the table of contents like we were doing, but the best method is really to use an index. An index at the back of the book, just like you would for a cookbook. If you want to see all of the recipes that use peppers, you flip to the back of the cookbook and you look for peppers, and it tells you all the recipes that include peppers. I'm from New Mexico, so it may even break it down further. Under peppers, you may have green chilies, chipotles, and it'll tell you specifically where those recipes use those peppers. This is the best method usually, because it has a controlled vocabulary. And this is where Hein comes into play again. Because Hein is just like the print version. Unfortunately, govinfo.gov does not have the index. So let's scroll down to the US code. The most recent edition is 2018. That's fine. Underneath all of these titles, we have our popular names table, which we'll talk about in a second. We have some other tables, and we have our index. So if I want to look for anything like, let's say, crowds. One of my students asked me in class this week about the concert crush situation that happened at the World concert a while ago. She was interested in that. So let's see if we can find crush or crowds. So you can see I have to scroll down. I don't know that we're going to make it to crowds. Let's go to call boxes. And you can see under call boxes, it's going to tell me to look in highways and roads, the highways and roads title 23, section 111. So now I can go to that portion of the US code. Let's look for highways. Title 23. And section 111 is going to be under federal aid. This website does take a little bit sometimes. Agreements relating to use and access of the right-of-way interstate system. Let me make sure. Yep, section 111. And here's a whole section about motorist call boxes in part D. And vending machines. So this must be about various rest stops. And you see, this is why it can be very helpful to use an index, because I don't know that I would have thought to call it a call box. I could have looked under payphone, and there would probably be this little line that says, for call boxes, see call boxes. Or I definitely didn't think it was going to be in this section, just looking at the title of this section. So I wouldn't have found it if I was just browsing. I would have had to search or use an index. The other reason to use an index rather than a full text search is the controlled vocabulary. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. You think death penalty, but it may in fact be called capital punishment in legislatese. You have to think of whatever term the legislature would be using. And it varies from state to state. So sometimes it's called false imprisonment. Sometimes it can be called wrongful imprisonment. Sometimes in Texas, it can be called unlawful restraint. Think of the same thing with DWIs. Sometimes it's DWI, sometimes it's DUI. Sometimes in some statutes, it's driving, I guess it's DWI, driving while impaired. But generally the index will help with that. It will tell you, if you look at false imprisonment, see wrongful imprisonment instead. Another tool that we can use is the popular name table. Just like we saw with the American Rescue Plan, that's not its real name. Its real name is an act to enact something, something, something. But we all call it the American Rescue Plan. Same thing with the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the official name is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, but we all call it Obamacare. Those are two popular names for the same bill. If you use the popular name table, it will give you the session law information with the public law number and the statutes at large site, and it will give you the codification information. So this is available for free from the US code, uscode.house.gov, here under the popular name tool. So let's look for the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. We're going to click on P over here. And Control F our way to Patient Protection. It says see patient, instead of Affordable Care Act, see Patient Protection. So here it tells me the public law number 111-114, and it gives me the statutes at large number, and it gives me the code section for where that generally starts. Just as a refresher, here again, we have our code section, our actual text, and then we have our statutory bits, of which there is only one. And then we have some editorial and statutory notes, including that you may call it the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Here, they've also given us some executive orders that have affected this particular code section. And that's it. This can be incredibly helpful, especially if you're researching laws that you've only seen referred to in the public media, because newspapers are not great about linking to the actual laws or giving you PDFs of the laws, much to my chagrin. So if you only ever hear about something in the news, you can look up the popular name and look up and read the text for yourself. Here's that same thing where it tells you the short title. That's going to be where that popular name comes from. Any questions? Now that we have all of these tools at our disposal, we can use them all and so start at one place and find any other piece of the information that we need. So we can locate the bill numbers and the sidebar at the statutes at large. We can look for the popular name on congress.gov like we did when we were originally searching. We could look up the session law number in congress.gov. Everything is connected. This is just to remind you, again, once you find that public law number, it's going to give you the bill number. If you have the bill number, you can look it up on congress.gov and get the statutes at large number. Everything is connected. There's my sneaky search box. So for recap, we have how to find statutes by topic using secondary sources, our index, or keyword searching. For that, I would definitely recommend using some Googling or on the house.gov, uscode.house.gov website. There's a search bar up here that is pretty good. It's not bad. You'll see it in a second how good or bad it is. The popular names table on uscode.house.gov or the bill number from congress.gov. I think we have time for a little game. We can play statutes bingo. So the free space I'm going to give you, so you only have to find two, but let's take a few minutes if you would like and try to find some of these laws. So I think we have till 3, correct, Diana? Excellent.
That's correct,
Well,
yes.
So let's take 5 minutes and see if you can find 2 of these. And when you're finished, if you could raise your hand. We might have a winner here today. Using any of the tools that we've seen and or Google. Let's see if you can find 2 of these. And I'll start my timer. My students in class this week had to do a blackout bingo. They had to get all of them. It took them 12 minutes for my undergrads. Thank you, Kelsey, for your enthusiasm. About a minute left.
I feel like I sort of got it because I've gotten two. I didn't use the free space, but if I'd used the free space, I would have only needed two. Does that count?
All right, let's see. We got another chat here. Yes. Okay, did anyone do this first box? Okay, this is a bit where Google is your friend. So you can just type that into Google and then click on this scholarly articles link. And if you're on campus, it links it to UGA. So this may be a bit of a trick if you're not on campus. But it brings you, again, back to our friend Hein Online. And in the text of the statute, of the law review article, in one of the footnotes, you'll see it refers to this 18 USC 1961 to 1968. So that's the answer to the first box. Did anyone get the second box?
I think I did.
Okay, what'd you get?
But now I don't understand my writing. For some reason I have the Protect Act. The Protect
Yes,
Act?
it is the Protect Act. Yes, how did you get there?
I went to Hein Online.
Okay.
Can I see the question again? Let's see.
Yes.
That's what I did. No, I went to the code page, the US code thing.
The Brown website?
Yes. No,
Or
I
maybe
think
this
it's
one.
that one. No.
Govinfo.gov. No. Okay, Kelsey used congress.gov, so let's start with that one.
Yeah, that's what I used.
Excellent. So you can do it a couple different ways. You can click on more options and come down to 108 and then look for, what was the bill number? Senate 151. And then hit search. And that takes you to it right away. You could also have searched S151, but that gets a little messier. But
That's what I
eventually you
did.
do see the Protect Act. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did anyone get what section of the US Code discusses the drinking age for a US citizen?
I did.
Yes. How did you find it?
Google.
Google. Yes.
158.
My students this past week used Google as well, but some of them do take you, when my students did it, I think Citizen might be throwing it off. They got something that took them to Cornell's LII page, which we haven't looked at yet. This is that Legal Information Institute that scrapes it periodically. So this gets funneled through Google a lot. You can see we have the US Code here. And then from there, it functions pretty much just like the housecode.uscode.house.gov. Did anyone get what was the USC title location for the McCain-Feingold Campaign Finance Reform Act using our popular name table? For that, we're going to go to our popular name tool. And we're just going to control F for campaign finance. We know it's not this District of Columbia. We're going to look for campaign. And if you Google it a little bit, it'll tell you that it's this Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002 that was introduced by McCain and Feingold. It took my students a little time to get that one this past week, but you can see that it's at 52 USC 10101, generally speaking. Which section of the US Code discusses respect for the flag, including whether it should be allowed to touch the ground? Kelsey got 18 USC 700, desecration of the flag. That is a different section than I got, but that still sounds like it fits the bill. Kelsey, how did you get there? Or maybe not. I'll show you how we got there. We did the search and browse. And we did the Title IV with the flag and seal of the government of the United States. And then the flag. And then there's only a couple of different options for you to choose from, including display and use of flag and respect for the flag. But Kelsey did a popular name tool and controlled F for the flag. Yeah, that's good. We're going to leave off for there for now, because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Does anyone have any questions? I know we threw a lot at you today, but there's still lots of room and time to practice.
I have a really general question.
Okay.
I know your top priority would be for law students and law faculty. What kind of support do you offer for the rest of campus?
We love to support the rest of campus. I actually have done so recently. We had a PhD student reach out to the reference desk and ask if they could be shown the basics. And we scheduled a conference where they came in and met with me. And we did something similar to what we're doing now as kind of a bare bones research. It is a bit of this, going back to this GIF of the parachute as a knapsack. It's a lot of stuff that we spend 14 weeks trying to teach our students that we then try to cram into 1 hour long consultation. But it really helps if I can kind of talk to you and figure out what it is that you're looking for and what you need. Then we can kind of pare down from there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else have any other questions? Well, that's all I have. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Savannah. That was great. I'll probably be in touch.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.